Okay. We'll be starting up here in about a minute. Um, well, 30, 45 seconds. Let everybody log in. While you're waiting, go ahead and open up your pods if you're probably used to that by now. But we'll see how many folks we get today. Okay. So good morning and welcome to the fourth of 5 webinars we're doing as a follow-up to some we did last fall on proven countermeasures. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the New York State LTAP Center. That's part of the Corner Local Roads program, the things that we do. Always looking to do things that will help you out and make things better. And so this is the third of our proven countermeasures series. And we're going to be improving chances for safe recovery and talking about local road safety plans today, briefly. This material comes from the New York State DOT's Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan, the FHWA's Proven Safety Countermeasures, and our Solutions for Safer Roads and Streets workbook and workshop manual. You're going to definitely want to open up your chat pod because in the chat pod, we will put a link to a handout that has the links to all these things. So you don't have to go searching for them. Um, and so if you're small and new to these webinars, like our little squirrel friend, he's only about 6 inches, you little cute fella. The lower left, there's an audio settings feature. You can check for audio if you've got issues. You can send us a question via the Q&A. The chat pod is a one-way. Open that up, and that's where we'll put in links so you don't have to memorize them. And if you have any questions, you can always put them in the Q&A. And of course, you may be asked to raise your hand a few times now and then. So this is worth a professional development hour here in New York State. And if you're with another state, well, check with your LTAP center. This is really a generic thing on proven safety countermeasures, though there are some New York-specific words we'll talk about today. Now, as I usually do with all this, is we're going to do a welcome to see who's here. We're going to be using pollev.com/DavidOrP to do that. Helps me know who's on the audience. I'm going to guess it looks a lot like the last one, but you know, I always love to be surprised. So let's go and see what we've got. So who do you work for? Do you work for a county, a town, a city or village, state or federal, tribal, metropolitan planning organization, MPO, a consulting firm, contracting firm, or everybody's working for the weekend? Let's see what you got there. Okay. Looks similar to last time. Okay, that's good. Okay. And then what is your job with that agency? Are you an engineer? Are you the highway superintendent, administrator, a planner? Are you in the field? Are you an elected official, a supervisor, a board member? Uh, Whatever the boss tells me to do. And of course, the infamous none of the above. If you do none of the above, though, I do ask, please throw into the Q&A, what does that actually mean? Okay. That would help me out quite a bit. Okay. So make sure you put that in there. And then, okay, it's about the same. About half of you are engineers. Um, and we've got a project manager for the other. That's good. Okay. Okay. And then where are you from? And we'll see if the map looks a lot like it did last time and if we still have our friend in the middle of Lake Ontario and our Canadian friend. It's very similar looking. Good variety of folks, rural, urban. I like to see it. That's cool. That's good variety and okay. Okay. So here we go. Now, I'm repeating some things. Oh, wait. I got somebody in Pennsylvania today. That's cool. I'm repeating some things for these 3 webinars on countermeasures because they want to make sure they're all self-standing. So I apologize if you've heard some of these slides before. But a lot of this is coming out, and these reasons we're doing these webinars is because of the New York State DOT's Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan. There's some funding, and I'll talk about the funding as well, that comes with this. But make sure when you download from the handout the Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan, be sure to download the appendices as well. There's a lot of really good information, especially on the proven countermeasures that are within those appendices. And why are we focused on that? Well, if you look at the fatal and serious injuries in New York State, about 40% of them are due to roadway departures. And if you look at the serious and fatal crashes, we're talking 2,500 uh, of those life-changing events every single year. We'd really like that number to be a lot closer to zero. Um, and some would say, well, we're down in 2024, but the 1 year does not a trend make. If anything, the trend is slightly up, and hopefully we're starting to see the beginning of a downward slide, but that's only on the serious injury side. Now, the roadway departure concept comes around, there's three ideas involved here. We're going to keep the vehicle on the road, okay? That could be done with stripes and keeping the lane widths where we want them and things like that. Good signage. We've talked about some of those. We're going to reduce the potential for the crash. We'll have some examples today where if you do leave the roadway, try to keep you from actually hitting something. Okay. And then finally, if you do have a crash, make sure that crash has low severity. Okay. So that would be including things like breakaway hardware and barriers and things like that. And we'll talk about a lot of those today. We're also going to talk about local road safety plans for the last bit of this webinar, just because it's such an important characteristic and it's part of the roadway departure local call for projects. If you have any questions about this particular call, make sure you contact the DOT. Andrew Sattinger can answer those questions for you, either a phone call or an email. But really, you want to go look at the web page. There's a lot of very good information there, including some of the data viewers on the plans itself and some of the ones I'm going to mention today. Now, in terms of the funds, if these funds are being released through the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP, they're only for local roads. So it has to be a town, county, village, or city, road or street. If you're in an MPO, you'll go through your MPO for this, but the key is it's for local roads. There's $90 million set aside, and 10 million of those 90 million are set aside specifically for developing a local road safety plan, and which is why we're going to spend some time today reminding you of some of the aspects there. Now, all of these are due on June 13th, so you got plenty of time, but you do need to start getting all your paperwork in place, and you need to start getting your cost in place, okay? Now, in terms of what proven countermeasures are eligible, well, if they're part of the hotspot series that's inside the roadway departure safety action plan, you're golden. If you're part of the emphasis areas in the systemic safety that the state did when they reviewed their own road system, you're in good shape. If you have your own local road safety plan, you're in good shape. And even if it's just a proven countermeasures from the list we've been going over, you're actually okay. But remember, you're competing with others who might have a plan, and if they have to choose, people with a plan are probably going to have a little higher priority. But my advice is put something together. There's plenty of funds, and if others don't put them in, you can do that. And if you don't have a plan, make sure you have one by the time this project is done. Now, what proven countermeasures are eligible? Well, again, if they're listed in the Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan, if they're part of the FHWA's proven safety countermeasures focused on roadway departures, they have a list of 22 of them. Not all of them are roadway departure ones. Or if it's from your local road safety plan or any data-driven local plan and you can support it with data, you can probably choose it. So which proven countermeasures should you choose? Which of our golden eggs do we want to choose? Over the last two webinars, we've talked about things like markings and rumble strips, lighting, roadside improvements at curves, widening shoulders, friction, flattening slopes, a whole bunch. And you may want to go back and look at those if you missed those webinars. Today, we're going to be talking about essentially things you don't want to hit. So we make them where you can hit them, and that's breakaway supports, barriers, and median barriers, all proven countermeasures. And then I'll spend some time on local road safety plans just because, again, it's very important to have a good plan. These webinars are being recorded. They're being posted on our website, and you can just search for us and find us pretty quickly. And we do have one more webinar coming up next week. I'll talk about that here in just a second. Before you do anything, make sure you have a good inventory, whether it's done by an old hand-sketched map like was done by Jim Markle when he worked here, or whether it's done with a GPS and all the fancy tools we have today. I don't care, but have a plan so you can start focusing where the problems are going to be occurring. Now, for each of these different countermeasures, I've gone through and I've sort of marked them out based upon the concepts in the roadway departure concept. And then what kind of crashes are we talking about? Are we talking about really working on head-on crashes, which we don't like, rollover crashes, hitting fixed objects on the side of the road? And are they more effective at night versus the day? And of course, we also want to look at curves versus tangents. We know curves are a major issue. You'll see a check mark with the primary. Those get a little higher emphasis, but you may consider any of these things that we highlight, and you may have arguments for going beyond what I'm going to show you. So let's get started with breakaway supports. We know they reduce the potential for a crash. They're usually placed inside the clear zone, where they're holding up signs. Even utility poles can actually have breakaway, though we don't use them very often. Um, we know that a lot of light poles are frangible, can be struck. The idea is so we get rid of the idea of a fixed object. We don't make them fixed anymore, and they're much more applicable at curves because people tend to run off the road more at curves. So, just to illustrate this, this is a small car. They like to test small cars because that's sort of the worst case scenario. And this is a single post. It's actually a 2-inch pipe. We don't use pipes for a reason, and here's why. Yeah, that's a bad day. That could lead to a serious crash, kind of injuries that are life-changing. Small little car. So we really want to be looking at good breakaway hardware. Okay, and there's lots of choices out there for breakaway hardware. So I'm just going to ask and get you to raise your hands. Raise your hand if your agency currently uses breakaway hardware regularly. It's in your standard operating procedure. Okay. Good. I'm glad to see you. That's good. It should be anything you're putting up should be breakaway. There's two reasons for that. One, even on what you think are those low-speed roadways, it's can be very effective. Two, it's required on anything 40 and above, based on MUTCD requirements. So, keep that in mind. There are some times when there's requirements involved. It can actually help make it easier to install the signs because you can do the ground post and then apply the breakaway hardware and attach the upper post. Tons of choices out there. But look at other items on the roadway, not just your signs. Look at your mailboxes, okay? Gang mailboxes are one of the most dangerous things we allow on the side of the roadway. There's good reasons to have a mailbox there, but boy, this car is having a really bad day. It's that same kind of small car. They go through them and where they test these things. I've seen them in Texas. They're pretty cool to watch. But that'd be a really bad day. Okay, that would certainly be a serious, if not fatal, injury. Now, if you're wondering about mailboxes, what you can do, they actually make a support for the mailbox that comes out. It's got this sort of tear duct shape to it. And then if a vehicle hits it, it actually flops on the hood and pushes off to the side. It's actually very effective at keeping it from getting into even a small car. So that's something you might want to think about requiring for mailboxes. Don't let people put those fixed object mailboxes. Nice brick looks nice, but boy, it can get you in big trouble. Make sure your sign support, you've thought about the design of the sign support. What is the breakaway mechanism itself? You can go high end. This is actually for a really large one on the interstate, which has a hinge system usually with it. Okay, not always, but a lot of times there's a hinge that goes up partway up, so a vehicle literally goes under it. And I'll show you a video of that here in a couple of minutes. But think about the design support. Okay, think about the stub height. Okay, the maximum height something should be above the ground for a stub is really only 4 inches, and 4 inches is over the length of the car. Okay, so it's really 4 inches over 5 feet. So if you've got a stub above the ground, that stub could still snag a vehicle as it drives along. These concrete anchors are too high. They put in a nice breakaway system, but if somebody were to drive down and hit this, and it'd be very likely because it's right in the ditch line, they hit those, they're actually going to have a problem. They can actually be more dangerous than if they hadn't anything at all. So think about your stub height, nothing above 4 inches, okay? And if you're putting up a posted system, okay, let's just compare a wooden post. If they're closer than 7 feet apart, you may need to think about your breakaway hardware, okay? There are standards and requirements for this. If you've got multiple posts, be very careful about things that are essentially a vehicle hits both posts, it's a lot more dangerous than if they only hit one. Okay, so keep those things in mind. So I'm going to just have you put it over into the Q&A for me. What issues do you see here? So this is in the Q&A. Give me, what do you see the problems here? There are actually three that you might put in there. We'll see if you catch two of them. And the ground posts are way too high. Yeah, that's the easy one. Okay, everybody should get that. Let's see if you catch the other one. The bolt spacing. Yes, too many bolts. It's actually not breakaway hardware. Breakaway hardware is usually consistent of two bolts or a strap system that are specifically designed to handle being hit. Okay, in fact, I'm going to actually go back because I can and show you. You can see the one on the left is a strap system. The one in the middle is just a single bolt system, and then the one on the right is a shearing device. There are specific standards that are out there, okay? Something called MASH, and we'll come back to MASH in a little bit. But yeah, you guys did a good job. By the way, the last one is yeah, you might be able to use one post. This particular picture, it doesn't show, but they've got this is actually facing against traffic. You could have a problem. If it's facing with traffic, that's okay. You post, you actually want to have them fail in a particular way. And of course, the post spacing is way too close to each other in a lot of ways. So be careful about these kind of things. Okay. Now, I want to spend a good bit of time on barriers, i.e. rail systems, okay? The goal here is we're trying to minimize the severity of a crash that does occur, okay? So we want to reduce the head-ons in some cases. It actually can help if you do it right, and we'll show you why in a minute. Can certainly help with rollovers and fixed objects, and the terminal ends are absolutely critical. And we know they work on both curves and tangents. So a pretty easy one. I'm not even going to ask you to raise your hand. I think everybody can agree that this is a location where you need guide rail. Okay? It would be really hard to do the other steps that are involved to get rid of the need for guide rail. But let me ask you here, raise your hands. Do you think you need guide rail here? Raise your hand. Do you think there's something else you could do instead? You know, it's easy to go, let's go put up rail. Okay? And I'm not saying that it isn't needed here, but I'll tell you right now, this particular rail system doesn't meet all the standards and may actually create some issues of its own. So before we put up rail, we really need to think about the order of treatment for rail. Okay? So the first thing we want to try to do, if we could, is remove it completely. You know, this is a case with a pretty good clear zone, except where the culvert is. What if we expanded the length of that culvert pipe and got rid of any need for rail whatsoever? That would actually be optimum. Make it traversable. Put something over the end of the culvert pipe so you could travel right over the top of it. Ooh, that'd be pretty cool. Relocate the object. Now, you can't do that with the culvert, but maybe you could move that utility pole if it was too close to the roadway. You could reduce the impact severity. That's where we were talking about the breakaway systems that are out there. And then, and only then, should we think about shielding things. Now, if you can't do any of those, we may, and we probably should always at least think about delineation. And there's really good evidence out there that for really low volume roads, we're talking under 400 vehicles a day, you might sometimes flip the delineation versus the shielding. And as a short term, you can always put some shielding up until you can get in there and do a more expansive rail system. So in terms of removing it, you know, we put a storm sewer system in and we get rid of any kind of ditch and driveway. Hey, we've removed the problem. Now, some could argue that's making it traversable, but again, can you remove an issue completely? Can you make it traversable? Okay, this is definitely not a traversable end. Okay, this is way too high. If you were to have that flush with the ground, it might even be removed completely if you had it short enough. Okay, but make it traversable. Um, this particular site, it doesn't look like much, but I hate to say it, there's 6 crosses there. So that tells you that it's not a good situation. And it's not an interstate, but you've seen places like that on a local road system as well. And people go, well, the ditches are safe. Well, a ditch that's too steep, someone loses control when they hit it, it can lead to a pretty serious crash. Okay? So try to think about making things traversable at all if you can do it. Now, we talked about slopes last week. We know how difficult that can be, especially with right-of-way issues. But, excuse me, Tuesday. I'm getting my days all mixed up. But think about making things traversable. Any culverts you've got, especially your driveway or even cross culverts, you might want to think about putting something where people could at least drive up and over it. Okay? Yeah, if they went down this ditch and they hit this rail and they hit this rebar grate, they're probably going to have a property damage crash. They may even have a minor injury, but they'll roll up on top and therefore they'll at least be able to have a minor injury at most. So you'll want to think about that for especially your cross culverts and even your driveways. Anything that's above 36 inches and you've got a flared end that's over 36 inches, you're going to want to think about doing something to make it traversable. Now, if you can, relocate your hazards, okay? Don't put the hazards in a place where they're much worse. Here's an example of a utility pole right in the bottom of the ditch. It's one of the worst places to have a utility pole because now if a vehicle does go off, if they survive going into the ditch, they're going to go right down that ditch. They have nowhere else to go. And if they're going to need speed, they're going to stop when they hit the utility pole. You've actually made things less safe by allowing your utility pole in one of the worst possible places. Really should be up on the bank, if at all possible. If you do have to have something in the clear zone, like mailboxes, like signs, make them crash worthy. So we've already seen this guy right here, the single vehicle hitting a single post, but think about what other things you can do. That's why we're a big fan of looking at the breakaway hardware. And there's lots of choices out there. Again, like all of these proven countermeasures, there's lots of overlap. So here, for instance, is a successful slip base test. Now, again, I don't see a lot of slip base on the local road system. I understand that. This is more of an interstate level kind of thing. But if you've got a high volume, high speed, you might want to think about that. But again, a simple system, a single bolt system, or it's a two bolt system, actually, in this case, U-channel. See, it did its job. Though in an urban area, I like the strap systems because you don't get a flying sign. Now, we've talked about the human factors thing. This is a good example of what happens if you've got something you've made crash worthy. This is a lady who had a issue medically. She kept pushing on her accelerator and she drove off the road. The sign failed properly. Okay? It did its job. It was crash worthy. So all she got was some damage to the front of her car. She and her daughter survived. Make things crash worthy. One crash should not lead to a serious incident if we can avoid it. Now, in terms of the hardware testing, both for the rail systems and the breakaway hardware, we used to use something called NCHRP 350. You may have read about that, but that has been superseded by something called MASH, or the Manual for Assessing Safety Hardware. First came out in 2016. I know they're working on updates to it. The key is there's new testing requirements. A little slightly bigger SUVs. Small cars are still small cars. More angles, more speeds to make sure things are safe. Okay, now we're going to talk about shielding. Okay, we're only talking about shielding now. We try to do everything else first, and we'll come back to talk about specific rail systems here in just a minute. But shielding is after you've checked and looked at everything else. And if, of course, you can't do that, you're going to want to delineate, but make sure the delineation is pointing in the right direction. Okay, so one of the problems we see as we travel around is people go, well, I'll just put up barrier. Well, if you put it up right, great, but in some cases, it can actually make things worse. In this case, they didn't want to take down the tree, and they knew it had been hit. So what they put instead was some barrier, Jersey barrier, right around the tree to protect the tree. But imagine a vehicle coming along, doesn't quite catch that white line and runs into where the tree is. That ramp of earth is actually going to drive someone right into the tree. Um, you really want to make sure you do rail properly, and that includes the rail itself and the approach. Now, you may hear the term guide rail versus guardrail. The difference is a word, okay? In New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, you'll hear the word guide rail because it's going to guide the vehicle. Almost everywhere else, you're going to hear guardrail. It's rail, okay? Barrier, if you want to say barrier. The key is it's a big rubber band. How does it work? Well, just like a big rubber band. Okay, let's go back and watch this again. Watch the vehicle come down the road. It hits this big band and pulls it right back. And if it does it really well, it actually pulls it back such that the person stays in their own lane. Okay, that's one of the reasons it actually, if done right, helps with reducing the number of head-on crashes, because instead of the vehicle hitting it and being pushed over into the lane, it actually can stay there. Okay? This is a test with nobody in it. And it really does a good job of minimizing the severity of the crash, just get property damage only. But one of the most important things with a good rail system is you've got to have the deflection distance involved. Okay? So let's just look at the typical deflection distances and the post spacings for different kinds of rail systems. So cable, W rail, weak post, box beam, W rail with the block out, the heavy post system, and then a concrete hat section. You can get the deflection from 11 feet down to 0 feet. Okay, but just ask yourself. I'll bring the chart right back up, and I'm going to start a poll here. What is the minimum deflection distance for W rail weak post? Okay. What's the minimum deflection distance? Okay, I'll let you put those answers in. And by the way, yes, I know there's a slightly smaller deflection distance for W rail weak post, post spacing, excuse me. It has the same deflection distance. The deflection differences aren't that great. And again, if you can't put them in the poll, you can put them up into the Q&A. And so let's go see what you guys come up with, and I'll get the responses up. And hopefully, yay, everybody got 5 feet. Okay. And somebody asked in the Q&A, how are standards changing given larger, heavier vehicles and heavy EVs? The larger, heavier, that's actually already incorporated to some extent in MASH. Okay, that takes care of quite a bit of it. These rail systems can actually handle buses and trucks. They're actually testing for some really large vehicles. The biggest issue we're going to see with the EVs is probably going to be with cable systems. They may have to retest those. The standards haven't changed yet, but there may be some changes because of lower center of gravity, and the cable systems aren't interconnected. But the heavier, I wouldn't be as worried about. Okay. Now, the reason I worry about this, it's one of my favorite things I ever did. I've been here almost 30 years, and that time was one of my favorite days. I was out with a highway superintendent looking at that guide rail picture. They were doing work. You can see they put the stripes down on the edge. They haven't put the centerline stripe down yet. While I was there, I talked with the highway superintendent. The tree was removed within a month because within a month, that rail system was hit. Had that rail system not been hit, we might have had a really bad day because you guys just told me the minimum I can get for a post spacing is 5 feet. I don't have 5 feet. 5 feet is actually to the backside of that tree. If somebody had hit that rail system, and they did about a month later, they would have actually been directed into the tree. And so the deflection wouldn't have worked. Instead of being a protective thing, it would have actually made things worse. So keep that in mind. The other thing is to make sure you have enough rail system. Is there enough guide rail here? Well, probably not. A vehicle can get behind here, and then we have a problem. I know we can't always put all the rail up we need, but if you have the opportunity, extend it where you can, you know, turn it out, get it as far out as you can. There are standards for this, and make sure you choose the proper end treatment selection. Okay. And those end treatments can be energy absorbing. They can be the kind that fail when it hits within a certain distance. The anchoring is absolutely critical. We don't want those old spears out there. Okay. Now, if you look carefully, watch when the vehicle hits. If it hits beyond that second post, that combination of hardware actually means everything beyond that point works. Okay? Now you can see there's a lot of energy involved. You're going to have to fix things, but that rail system is doing its job as a big rubber band for that truck that hit it. Okay? And those guide rail anchors, well, they really work. Now, some of the energy absorbing systems, this was sent to me by Gary Mayer with Saratoga County. Thank you, Gary. I don't know if he's on here today. He's not on here today. But he sent me this picture. This is an energy absorbing system that did the job. Someone hit the rail at the end. It just literally telescoped out. The metal got coiled away, and they now need to fix it. Okay? Pretty cool. So, by the way, it wasn't in their county road system. It's just something he was driving down the road, much like I do with my wife. You got to go stop and take a picture. Make sure you have a safety vest in the car because you can stop and take your picture. But the terminals really do matter. The transitions matter. So these are proven countermeasures, things you might want to think about, going around looking at your system and seeing what you've got available. I mean, look here, this bridge approach rail and the bridge aren't connected. So unless that bridge approach rail has a zero deflection, someone gets even a little bit of deflection, they're going to hit that concrete end. I mean, look at this. This is an example. They've got them connected, but there's not enough transition. So the vehicle, rather than getting onto the bridge to a zero deflection, it literally destroys the vehicle. Someone was actually in this vehicle, they would probably be at least a serious injury, more likely a fatality. So you want to think about upgrading your hardware. This would be a perfect opportunity, and it is a proven countermeasure to improve your transitions. Make sure your bridge approaches are right. Get rid of old, antiquated hardware. Put up proper barrier systems. Okay? So let's just ask you a couple of times, and then we'll move on to local road safety plans. What would you do here? Okay? I don't know if I think actually I just have one of these. What would you do here? So I'm going to open up a poll, and I'll leave a picture on the bottom right to remind you. What would you do in this particular case? I can think of about 3 or 4 things you might want to think about. Absolutely. Replace that boxing glove terminal. You might need to remove some trees. There might be trees within the deflection distance. You might need to extend the rail. You might not. Obviously, for a single photograph, it's really hard to know exactly what to do. But as a minimum, a proper end, you may need to upgrade and check the deflection distance out. Okay. Now, whether you use an energy absorbing system or a breakaway system, uh, it depends on, of course, the site, but these are things you might want to think about. You might want to flare it back and offset it a little bit. Yeah. Again, think about it. Oh, I like that. Reflective tape. They actually make delineators for rail systems. As a minimum, you can always add delineators to the rail system itself. And if we actually go back a picture, I'm going to go back, you can actually see in the distance there's a curve. And the rail going around the corner, that delineators that are in the rail system can really help. If you put those in, though, make sure they're put in properly because they can actually change some of the deflection characteristics and how the breakaway systems work. Um, and again, whether you need to length it or not, you'll think about that. Volume will matter, speed will matter. There's a whole bunch of stuff. In fact, you're probably going, boy, this is a pretty quick review. It's 15 minutes for all the barrier systems? Well, I have good news for you and bad news. The good news is we're actually doing a webinar as part of our foundational webinar series uh, on June 24th. The bad news is that's after June 13th when all of these proposals are due. But you can put your proposal in and maybe help get some delineation, get some details ready to go if you do get the grant. It's on June 24th, 9 to 10. Sign up. We just sent out our road chatter and it's listed in there. Okay. Now, I don't want to forget about median barriers. That's included in the Highway Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan. These are for head-ons and night times. Obviously, it's for multi-lane roads typically. You're probably not going to have a lot. This is from Federal Highway, excuse me, not the Roadway Departure Plan. Sorry, my apologies. This is a proven countermeasure from the Federal Highway Administration. It's really good at head-ons, obviously. I doubt very many of you have them, but if you do have them or you're thinking about it, one of the reasons they're a proven countermeasure is 8% of all fatalities on divided highways occur due to someone going across. And you put in a proper barrier, you get a 97% reduction, a CRF of 97%, a crash modification factor of 0.03. In other words, you pretty much get rid of almost all the serious and fatal crashes. Now, just like with barrier systems, you got to put it in right. Here's a situation where the rail was okay, but that little bit of a culvert and dip right there, and someone going a little bit too fast led to a really bad day. Now, while there was a bit of an installation issue, this is an example of why we really like the safe systems approach. Redundancy matters. That person who came and launched themselves at over 100 miles an hour survived with serious injuries. But the redundancy, because it happened to get them quick post-crash care, they were okay. Okay, after obviously some time in the hospital. Now, if you do have median barrier, the main thing, you got to maintain it. In fact, this is true for barrier anywhere. It's got to be at the right height to do the job. This rail is so low, has had so many overlays on this roadway that that actually could make it worse. So again, whether it's a barrier system on the side of the road or a median barrier, you might want to think about upgrading your hardware. Now, what I want to spend the rest of our time, except for the conclusion where I talk about the money, on local road safety plans. Absolutely critical. So let me ask you, I'm going to make sure everybody's hands are lowered. How many of you have a local road safety plan? Raise your hand if you have a local road safety plan. It may not be just your agency. It might be one for the whole county. It might be a bunch of you together, but raise your hand if you have a local road safety plan. Okay, well, that's good news for me and bad news. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity you should avail yourself of. Absolutely, you want to have a plan. Okay? It reduces your liability. It makes you more eligible for other grants. And I'll actually be talking about another grant as well towards the end of our time together. So you absolutely want to have a local road safety plan. And it really covers the whole gamut, not just of roadway departures, but also intersection issues, pedestrian and bicycle issues. And if there's additional funds out there, you'll be more eligible for them. The steps, they're pretty easy. We actually did a whole 1-hour webinar back last fall, and yes, it's recorded and on our website. But you're going to identify your stakeholders. You're going to use data to develop your risk factors, and you're going to choose proven solutions. That's why there's those proven countermeasures that we've been talking about. Now, the key here, and this is maybe the single most challenging part, is once you develop that plan, you have to implement them. Okay? That's really important. Now, in terms of identifying the stakeholders, well, let's just see. What do you think are the stakeholders for a local road safety plan? Who should be involved in developing a plan in your municipality? Yeah, the people who live there, the people who pay the taxes. Yeah. The police should probably be involved. You're going to definitely want the board members on board because they're going to be approving the plans and paying for it with probably local funds. Yep. You're going to probably, yeah, politicians. Some people with the highway department and the DPW, absolutely, because you're going to be implementing it. You're going to bring the engineers in. You want emergency services involved. Okay. You might want some people from the community with the bus for the schools. You might want people who are with the businesses. Yep, cool. I like to see it. Think about building up a group of people that would be stakeholders. Now, it could be a pretty large one for a plan because you really want lots of people, but it's very similar to the numbers you might see for a road safety audit or assessment, where you bring in a variety of people to get a variety of viewpoints, and together we actually come up with a better plan than we might have on our own because different people see things in different ways. So make sure you think about including everybody in your plan if you can get their feedback. Now, if you do that, you get their ideas, you get their thoughts, and then you start taking safety data and you start looking at the risk factors. And you're looking for those that are the most common, like crashes at curves, crashes involving people who are speeding, crashes involving people who are elderly or distracted. And you also look for the ones that are overrepresented. They're more common than they ought to be. You know, a systemic problem like more crashes occur at curves, more crashes occur at night, and you apply a systemic countermeasure, or in some cases, a system-wide countermeasure in some cases. Now, in terms of fatal crashes, just as a reminder, overturn crashes, that's a roadway departure. That's 11% of all fatal crashes. Head-ons, that's about 11%. Hit objects, that's 28%. Okay? If we could eliminate those, this is nationwide numbers, not New York numbers. But if you could eliminate that, you're eliminating essentially over half of all crashes, or just about half of all crashes. That's pretty good. Okay? So we really want to think about a systemic safety approach, a data-driven approach. And here's the cool part. It'd be pretty cool to go to a public meeting and tell people we're doing this because we can focus on crashes before a crash occurs. We can focus on those critical locations. Now, if you were on one of our other webinars, you've seen this picture before. This is all the fatal crashes that occurred in the southern tier between 2012 and 2014. And you can't really see a place that needs to be treated. And even if you think you can, remember, the closest dots are like a half a mile apart. There's not really a hot spot from the fatal standpoint. If you had serious crashes, you might see a few, and that's actually part of the state's roadway departure safety action plan hotspot map that you can get to by going to their website. But you also want to look at those overrepresented factors when you're developing a local road safety plans. If we had just looked at the curve radii, this is the state did this, you would expect 7% of your crashes would occur on roads that have a radius of 100 to 300 feet. 10% would be on 300 to 500, 6% and 5% for the other factors. But if you actually look at the number of serious crashes, well, it's 12% that are occurring on those sharp corners. It's 12% that are occurring on the next group of corners. They're overrepresented. So we want to focus our efforts on those sharp corners. In fact, you don't actually start to see that number come close to the actual percentage of curves until you get a pretty flat curve radius, 500 to 700 feet or flatter. Okay? So I bet you can actually come up with a list of risk factors that then you can go out and start thinking about getting data. So let's see what you come up with. Let's see if you guys can come up with a little wordle of what are the most common risk factors on your roads and streets. What do you think? Curves? We've already mentioned that. Absolutely. Yeah, places with trees, especially if they're close to the roadway. Okay. Some drainage issues, utility poles, lighting issues, blind corners, visibility, slopes. Okay. I see someone put deer in there. Certain times of year, deer can be an issue. Yeah. And animals. You start making yourself a list up of things that make a difference in terms of severe crashes. Because remember, we're trying to focus on the fatal and severe crashes. And you'll probably be able to get a pretty good list for your community. And then go look at the data and see if the data matches. Because what you're then going to do is you're going to figure out for each segment of highway, is there a risk factor? And then is there actually an overrepresented kind of crash going on? So maybe we come up with in our community that curves are an issue. More crashes occur at curves. More crashes occur with narrow shoulders. More crashes occur with high speed. And we develop a matrix of the ones that matter. So in this case, we've got 5 different factors that we finally settled on. You don't want too many factors. And then you say, okay, we're going to look at the sharp corners, the high speed, whether there's been a crash there or not. Um, Maybe the downhill grade turned out to be a pretty important factor because going down some steep hills made a difference, and then high volume made a difference as well. Vehicles per day or AADT if you prefer. And then what you're just going to do is add them up. Yes, you could do weighted factors as well. I understand that. But here's the cool thing about just adding them up. It's fairly easy to communicate that, and then you get just a simple priority, A, B, C. And so you would work first on the highest priorities, which in this case would be Jones Road and the 2 parts of Smith Street. Now, again, you might actually go to a place that take a place that's had crashes and it drops down the list because doesn't have the other factors. And the nice thing about a list like this is if you're in the area, you might go ahead and do some repairs while you're nearby. Maybe on Jones Road, while you're there, you go ahead and take care of those Bs. Develop a plan and you have to implement that plan. That's the key, and that's actually the beauty of having a local road safety plan. Now, you got to go collect data. We know that's an issue. Data matters. Preferably measured data, measured speed, measured curve radius, measured road width, shoulder width, type of road. Those kind of things are great, but you can't always get measured data. You might have to do qualitative data, good, bad, or ugly kind of things, high volume, low volume kind of qualitative data. One of my favorite things, though, I think we don't do enough of this, and we could do a lot of this, is what's called surrogate data. A perfect example of surrogate data is sitting here in this picture. Anybody tell me something they could think of as surrogate data where you use one piece of information to get another piece of information? See if someone can come up with a piece of surrogate data sitting in this picture. There's actually a pretty cool one there. They're all thinking. Well, I'll give you a hint. We're actually doing the last of this series of webinars on Tuesday on the use of the ball bank indicator for advisory speeds. The advisory speed plaque that's underneath your curve signs and the fact that it's multiple curves, it's a piece of surrogate data. It tells you if it's a 55-mile-an-hour road and it says 30 miles an hour, that's a relatively sharp curve. And you now know where your sharp curves are. Okay? You may not know the radius, but you know it's a relatively sharp curve because of the differential in speed. And that can be a good surrogate measure for how sharp the curve is without having to even check the radius. And of course, you could check the radius with Google if need be. Now, if you don't have it, you may want to get access to the Crash Location Engineering Analysis Repository, i.e. CLEAR. This is where they put all the crashes in from the reports. And you can use that clear data to find things. And that's how the state did their hotspot analysis, is with clear. So it's a good place to get started. It may not have everything, but you can use that to develop and get you some of your data so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Now, you're going to take all of this and you're going to use proven countermeasures. Okay. Now, we did a review of all proven countermeasures on November 14th, but remember here we're going to focus on ones based upon your local road safety plan. Now, in this case, we want to focus on the roadway departure ones, but your plan might actually say, if we looked at our data, we might actually want to do, different kind of analyses, but think about where you're going to get the funding from. But use proven solutions, okay? Now, somebody asked a question. This is one that comes up quite often. Can you get a ticket for not following an advisory speed? Well, you can't get a ticket if you don't crash. Advisory speeds are not really designed to be a speed limit. They're designed to be advice, and we'll talk about why a lot more next Tuesday. If someone does get into a crash, they can get a ticket after the fact, or if they do something that's considered dangerous, they can get a ticket. That's up to the police agencies in that particular case. But in of itself, if I go around the corner at 45 and this plaque said 40, no. And we'll talk about that a lot more next Tuesday. You're going to need to implement the solutions. And this is key. You got to get that buy-in from the stakeholders. If you don't have that buy-in, it doesn't matter. And of course, one of the biggest stakeholders and why they need to be in part of your advisory panel for your local road safety plan is the board, because they're going to be the ones providing the money. Okay? Now, remember, once you put something in, can you maintain it? I always think about this is if you've got a plan, can you maintain it? If you put down stripes, whether they're center line or edge lines, can you maintain them? If you put up rail, do you put up a rail type like a cable that needs to be checked every few months to make sure the turnbuckles are doing their job, the tension is in the right place? Think about the maintenance cost, because you're not going to get a grant for that. So you're going to be incorporating it into your normal activity. And how often do you update the plan? How long is the plan good for? 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? Certainly, we know that probably not any longer than that. Things change, but you'd be surprised how long a plan can be maintained. And if you've got a good plan, it's relatively easy to update. Be sure it's flexible because things change. Now, in terms of what a plan looks like, it can get really complicated. And all I want you to understand is that good plan has cost information in it, has estimates for the number of crashes that are reduced, it has all that detail. So, don't try to read this. I know it's too small. It's only a model. It's just to get you to think about the more detail you have in the plan, the better off you're going to be later on. Okay? Now, one more example. Let's just go through this process real fast. We're going to implement a plan real quick. We're going to identify stakeholders, safety data, and all that fun stuff. So we're going to use the Cornell Center campus just as an example. Okay. Now, we don't have a lot of serious crashes on the Cornell campus. So these are fake risk factors that might, quote unquote, occur in a certain situation. So just to throw some ideas out there. So if we looked at the possible risk factors, and let's say the data supported the fact that we've got some signal problems. We've had some serious crashes where the few signals are on campus. We've had a couple of crashes that are severe. We've got a couple of curves that lead to issues, and the higher volume roads tend to have more problems. Okay, we don't have anything above 45 miles an hour, so that's a risk factor we wouldn't even need to include. We'd actually take it out. So we'd add those up, and our priority would be part of Feeney or East Avenue would be the highest priority because it has a sharp curve, high volume, and has a signal near that curve even. Okay, so that's a place we probably want to look at if that's where the crashes had occurred. But there wasn't a crash, so guess what? It's still a high priority. That's the cool stuff about a systemic safety. You don't wait for the crash, you look for the problems. Your next ones would be Hoy Road, where they've had, got volumes and curves, and there was a crash, things like that. So the idea is you develop a plan, and it might change, okay? You might have to change that plan around, okay? as data changes, as you get new information. Okay? So that's the idea of a good plan. Now, someone asked, do I have examples of plans that you'd recommend to review? There's plenty of plans out there. We have a link to a couple, one from Chemung County and one from the St. Regis Native American tribe. They did a thing up there along the Canadian border. They actually looked at areas outside the actual reservation area and found actually a pretty interesting risk factor. A lot of crashes occurring at about 2 o'clock in the morning. Bars closed about then. Yeah, it was actually a risk factor they had to incorporate into their overall safety plan. Make sure you match the countermeasures to the risk. Okay? So in this case, pavement markings are probably going to be your strongest thing, but delineation for curves and curve improvements certainly could be helpful. Crosswalk improvements and better signals, if you got a signal problem, could be improvements. So match the countermeasures to the plan. Okay? So look for those things. And if you think you've got a risk factor, like somebody had mentioned earlier, they're worried about manholes being that loose manhole could lead to a fatality if it pops up. That actually has happened usually when somebody's pulled the manhole cover off. But think about those things and then, okay, how would I fix that? Do I need to lock them down? Do I need to worry about the velocity? We know that there was actually a crash in a Formula One race because they forgot to anchor the uh, manhole cover down, and those things produce so much ground force it actually picked up the manhole. Again, look at risk factors. And then make sure you've implemented the solutions. A plan that sits on a shelf and doesn't get implemented isn't a plan. It's a piece of paper. So don't want just to get cobwebs on it. Really want to have a plan that you're actually using and implementing. Okay. So those are the ideas behind the local road safety plan. You really want to make sure that it has all 4 steps and the implementation of the solutions. The good news is there's money available. So we've gone through all of our eligible countermeasures. I'm going to ask, like I have in the last 2 times, which of these 4 are you going to try? You're going to try to look at your breakaway supports, your barriers, your median barriers. Do you have any median barriers? I don't think many of you do, but maybe you do. Who? A few of you do. That's cool. And then local road safety plans. How many of you are going to at least, if you don't already have one, think about developing a local road safety plan? Okay, cool. I like it. I'll give you another 10, 15 seconds, and I will open this up now to any questions that you've got. If you got any questions, we can answer them. Okay. Okay, that's good. Any last questions? Otherwise, just to remind you, we do have upcoming next Tuesday. We have one more webinar in this series. It's on the use of the ball bank to determine the proper advisory speed for curves. We will talk about the other methods briefly that are out there, but really we're going to focus mainly on making sure the ball bank for determining. And you can ask, if there's any questions on the roadway departure safety action plan, any questions on the call for funds. Someone did ask there, you mentioned something about MASH, and I'm not talking about Gary Burkhoff and helicopters. I'm talking about MASH. It's the Manual for Assessing Safety Hardware. It's essentially the crash test standard. And they crash test guide rail, they crash test signs, they crash test utility poles. And so if you're putting something in the right of way that you're worried about getting struck, you want to use the MASH test because the vehicles are larger, the vehicles are higher, and it more closely matches the current fleet. Okay, and there are different standards for different speed and types of roadways. The local road with low volume, low speed, you can probably get away with a little bit less in terms of capacity than if it's on the interstate system. There, you're going to really want to be able to handle everything all the way up to tractor trailers. And yes, they do actually test trucks. It's actually some pretty cool stuff out there. Okay, let's see. Again, no more questions right now. Reminder of the funds, $90 million for local roads. $10 million has been set aside for developing local road safety plans, and they are due June 13th. If you have any questions after today, you can send us an email, but you can also contact the state. Andrew Sattinger can help you out there. But before you do that, please go to the call page, look it over. And again, this is in the handout. And if you can't get the handout, you could throw it in the Q&A. We can get it to you or email it to you. So, are you planning on putting in for some funds? You can check all of these, or you can check none of them. Are you going to put in to develop a local road safety plan, to implement some countermeasures? Nah, I'm not going to bother. Are you not sure? Let's see what we get today. Okay. And again, if you can't answer it, you can always throw that in the Q&A. Okay, there's still a lot of you who are not sure. Okay. What I would say is there's plenty of funds out there. There's two things I think we're going to find out from this call. Number one is uh, if how many people that want to put in plans. We don't know. We know that when the US DOT came out with their Safe Streets for All, which I'm about to talk about, the first rounds, they didn't actually give away all the money. So you might want to put in a plan just to see what's out there. You might win. You never know. And if you don't have a local road safety plan, absolutely, I would put that in your priority list. Again, you can bundle that. In fact, we actually recommend you might want to bundle that at the county level or have several municipalities together. If you're an MPO, work with your MPO. You're going to be sending them the proposal anyway. Why don't you develop a local road safety plan, put one in for that, and then one in for the grants? Because later on, if you want some of the other funds, it's really going to help to have that plan. And I will remind you, the US DOT has a direct call. These are monies going directly to locals. They've got a notice of funding opportunity, a NOFO, and the deadline for that is a couple of weeks after the one for the Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan, June 26th. In this case, if you don't have a plan, you can't get implementation. You have to have a plan in place. So what you're going to want to do is, if you don't have a plan, is apply for one. But hey, you can get one here in the state system because they set aside 10 million just for that. You can do demo grants through this process. If you want to try something out, you're like, I don't know about roundabouts. I don't know about safety edge. You could do a demonstration project with this. But again, there's two opportunities for funding. Both are considered federal funds. You do need to understand the federal procedures. And if you're not totally up to speed on the federal procedures, we do have a 4-hour session with breaks. Is longer than 4 hours, but 4 hours of time together for Local Federal Aid 101, where we overview the process, and that will be on May 22nd. Okay, so essentially 3 weeks from today, starting at 9:30 with some breaks. Okay. Now, a couple of questions that are in there. One question here, we'll see if the last questions that we've got. Can you use this money to develop a street lighting inventory GIS system where the lights are? Well, again, you would have to show it's got a roadway departure aspect for the state's call. The national call, this one here, it would have to show that it fits within a grant program. You'd be able, at best, being able to do a planning grant. If it was part of an overall local road safety plan to develop an inventory, possibly. But you'd have to show, especially the state's one, that there's a roadway departure aspect. And lighting is not a priority. It could be considered. I would want to make sure you had more in there than just the lighting aspect to it as well. Okay. Any other questions? Let's see if we got any other questions. By the way, if you're wondering, I took this the other day. It was just a nice sunset coming out. Breakaway in the distance from the roadway. Again, the breakaway distance, that's the rail system I think you're talking about. Oh, in terms of lighting, you're talking about. Again, that's going to be the key. Remember, one way to think about when you're writing the grant is remember, you're writing this for somebody who doesn't know your system. And so you want to write it in such a way that they go, oh, they get the idea of a roadway departure problem that we've got. Okay. So that would be the key that you'd want to have. With that, I don't see any more open questions. I will not just keep you till the top of the hour. I will say thank you and give you back, I think it's about a minute and a half because my clock on my wall is just a little bit slow. Everybody have a great day. Hope to see some of you Tuesday or 3 weeks from now and maybe at the highway school. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.